All right, with me now is Democratic Congressman Adam Smith, the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, always great to have you here.
Good to see you, John.
How clear, and I know you heard Aaron Burnett's interview with President Biden the other night, how clear do you think the president's policy toward Israel in terms of supplying weapons is right now?
Well, there's one aspect of it that isn't clear, but overall, it's incredibly clear that the U.S. is supporting Israel. We just passed a massive supplemental. We continue to give weapons to them to defend themselves. Just a couple of weeks ago, we defended them against the attack from Iran, hundreds of missiles that were shot down, and the U.S. played a huge role in that. That's clear. And the specific aspect of what weapons is he talking about restricting from Israel based on what actions, I don't think that was as clear as it was. Now, John Kirby cleared it up quite a bit yesterday, talking about dumb bombs specifically, and if the attack in Rafah amounts to basically a full urban invasion, and you're talking about dropping bombs indiscriminately. But I don't think that is as clear as it should be, and I think the president ought to clear it up.
You think it's a communications issue?
It's a really complicated problem. I mean, look, Israel is trying to defeat Hamas. That requires military action. At the same time, you have a massive humanitarian crisis. What the president has been trying to do from the beginning of this conflict is help Israel defend itself, defeat Hamas, and at the same time minimize that humanitarian catastrophe. That's not easy. It's not easy for Israel, and it's not easy for us as we're trying to help them in that effort.
Do you agree with the policy of threatening to withhold certain weapons if Israel goes further into Rafah?
I don't think he should have done it publicly. I think the private conversations were very appropriate. I think the other possibility is in-use restrictions. We've done that, for instance, in Ukraine. You know, here's your weapons, can't fire into Russia.
Why don't you think he should have done it publicly?
Because, look, the biggest block to a ceasefire right now is Hamas. And that's being largely underreported. There has been a ceasefire agreement on the table for months, which the president brokered to allow for the return of hostages and temporary ceasefire. Hamas has blocked that and said, no, Israel has to completely withdraw, permanent ceasefire, and oh, by the way, we're only going to return some of the hostages over an extended period of time. That offer's been on the table. We have to keep the pressure on Hamas to agree to that ceasefire.
So what then does making the public threat to withhold weapons do?
Well, I think it's being way overblown. Okay, and obviously there's politics involved here. The Republicans attack Joe Biden every time he opens his mouth. The notion that this is some kind of huge signal that we're backing off of our support for Israel, the facts don't back that up.
But you said you wish he hadn't done it publicly, and I'm trying to understand why.
Well, it doesn't help. Okay, what I just said was the idea that somehow this is some huge break with Israel. Well, why? Is because I think it took pressure off of Hamas when it shouldn't have.
You think it disincentivizes Hamas from making a deal, some kind of a pause?
It's a small part of the larger problem. Look, I mean, some of the broader reporting on this is part of the problem, too. I mean, the New York Times initially reported Hamas agrees to a ceasefire, and it's largely what Israel was asking for. That's not what it was. It wasn't even close. A lot of the global reporting has underscored the problems that Hamas is presenting, and I think that's a problem. But again, I think this has been blown out of proportion. The U.S. still supports Israel. We also want to get to a better humanitarian situation in Gaza. That's the very difficult terrain the president is trying to navigate.
You spend most of your time in the Northwest and in Washington, D.C. It's always nice to see you here in New York City. Yeah. I don't know if you're aware, there's a big trial going on here in New York City.
Have they been reporting about that?
Every once in a while we touch on it here. What do you think the impact of this trial will be on the election?
Well, I think, look, it's hard to say at this point. In the world that I grew up in, the impact of all of this would have been that Donald Trump would have been out of politics. That would have been the end of it. So what world are we living in? It's kind of hard to say. Personally, I think this emphasizes the weaknesses that Donald Trump brings to the office, on a whole wide variety of different issues. I do think it matters whether or not there's a conviction. Now, I would also say that day after day after day, talking about the president and whether or not he did pay off a porn star based on a sexual relationship, that should undermine his candidacy. It should. But ultimately, it seems like the public wants to see whether or not he's convicted.
Congressman Adam Smith, always great to have you here in New York. Appreciate it.